Another cemetery makes our list of 13 supernatural places in Arkansas. Reputable sources conflict as to whether the old Confederate cemetery in the Mississippi Delta sits atop a Crowley's Ridge Hill in St. Mary's Cemetery or Maple Hill Cemetery. The two appear to be very close in proximity and may sit adjacent to each other. The hill bore witness to one of the most bloody and pivotal battles in the American Civil War. Dubbed Graveyard Hill in the 19th century, it is more commonly known today as Cemetery Hill. Sources, including websites and blogs devoted to both tourism and the paranormal, oral history, and avid ghost hunters, insist that the souls of the many Confederate soldiers who died on Cemetery Hill during the Battle of Helena still linger as apparitions in and around the cemetery grounds. Legend holds that these spirits are especially present in the old Confederate cemetery. The historic town of Helena, West Helena, was a vibrant port city positioned on the Mississippi River in the East Delta region of Arkansas during the agricultural boom times of the 19th century. Mother Nature, in the form of an earthquake millions of years earlier, had created the difficult topography around the town, which was surrounded by a series of hills cut by deeply thicketed ravines. The loss of Helena, at the time of the Civil War, Helena and West Helena were two separate towns, was devastating to the Confederate Army because of the town's strategic position on the mighty Mississippi. While Helena was actually the only town seized by Union forces in the district of eastern Arkansas, the Union's occupation of the town cut off much-needed shipping supplies to other regions of the Confederacy. The Union forces occupying Helena were keenly aware of its importance to the rest of the state and thus established its headquarters of the Arkansas Eastern District there. Strategically, Helena's steep ridges made it easier for Union troops to defend. Taking full advantage of the steep ridges and deep ravines, the Union troops under the command of Major General Benjamin Mayberry Prentice built 4 batteries in strategic positions in a semicircle around the town. Batteries A, B, and D. Battery C was constructed on the top of Graveyard Hill and had an excellent view of the river and the USS Tyler, a huge paddle wheel steamer armed with heavy firepower and anchored just offshore. 20,000 Union troops, plus thousands of freed slaves, had increased the town's population substantially and created a housing shortage. With a cramped population came health and sanitation problems, with the town's streets a muddy mess during the frequent rains. The Union troops stationed in Helena found the town wet, cold, and miserable during the winter and hot with mosquito infestation during the summer. A troop of Union soldiers from Iowa dubbed the town Hell in Arkansas. In the spring of 1863, the Confederate Army decided that, strategically, it must retake Helena from the Union forces. Several Confederate generals, under the leadership of Commanding General Theophilus Holmes, began to hatch their assault plan. The other military leaders were General Sterling Price, General John S. Marmaduke, and Brigadier General James Fagan. General Holmes knew the challenges of an assault. 20,000 Union troops stationed under the command of Prentice, already a Union war hero from the Battle of Shiloh, coupled with the difficult terrain of the town. But in June of 1863, Marmaduke reported to Holmes that a large garrison of Union troops had departed Helena to assist Grant's army at Vicksburg, leaving Prentice's troops in Helena depleted. Upon hearing Marmaduke's report, General Holmes changed his mind about the attack on Helena. He wrote to Lieutenant General Edmund Kirby Smith, commander of the Confederate Trans-Mississippi Department located in Shreveport, stating that he believed he and his generals could retake Helena. "Most certainly do it," was Lieutenant General Smith's reply. The Battle of Helena was set for July 4th, 1863. If the alleged high level of paranormal activity in and around the Confederate cemetery is indicative of how the Battle of Helena transpired, One could easily conclude it was an epic failure for the Confederates, and it was. In fact, 2 other key and decisive battles were also fought in different states on the same dates of July 3rd and 4th, 1863, Gettysburg and Vicksburg. The Confederacy lost all 3 battles. Holmes had ordered Fagan, Price, and Marmaduke, along with Brigadier Ben Walker, to attack their respectively assigned Union batteries at daylight. Coordinated attacks through timely communication were extremely difficult 150 years ago. Tragically, the various Confederate commanders would interpret Holmes' orders to have different meanings. In the Battle of Helena, miscues, confusion, the difficult terrain, and poor communication created a recipe for disaster. The different Confederate generals and their regiments attacked the 4 Union batteries at different times. As a result, they were unable to come to assist their fellow regiments in the need of reinforcement at other battery locations. Only General Price and his regiment of 3,095 troops were tasked by Holmes with taking Union Battery C on Graveyard Hill. As the Confederate soldiers stormed the hill, they came under extensive fire. Price and his troops managed to secure the protecting rifle pits of the Union forces, but were still unable to take the battery. Twice, Price's regiment was forced to pull back. But on the 3rd charge, at the high cost of hundreds of Confederate lives, General Price successfully seized Battery C on Graveyard Hill and sent the Union soldiers scrambling away from the hill. It would be the only Union battery of the 4 successfully taken by the Confederates. Either because of incompetence or the confusion of the battle or both, General Holmes arrived at Battery C to join General Price and began to give contradictory orders to his generals. This served to further destabilize the Confederates' delicate hold on Battery C and Graveyard Hill. The ultimate result was a disaster. The exhausted generals and their regiments, disoriented by the blistering summer heat and the unceasing, relentless fire raining down upon them, lost their hold in Graveyard Hill. At 10:30 a.m., General Holmes ordered a retreat by all Confederate troops to their temporary headquarters a few miles away. The Battle of Helena was over, considering the Confederate forces had vastly outnumbered Union General Prentice's depleted troops. The defeat was stunning and costly. The Union gunboat, the USS Tyler, had accounted for approximately 600 Confederate deaths alone. All over Graveyard Hill lay the carnage of dead and dying Confederate soldiers. One Wisconsin soldier who walked the blood-soaked hill after the battle wrote, "The battlefield is no pleasant place to visit, covered with men wounded in all ways, some with brains exposed, others shot through the body with grape shot, or a larger ball still sufficient to nearly cut the body in twain." Another Wisconsin soldier wrote to his family, "Just to see the rebels lying in piles where they charged the hill, it was awful. I never want to spend another such 4th of July." So many dead, such violent deaths. So many souls, many of whom died so quickly their spirits may not have realized they were dead. All of these factors make the old Confederate cemetery a prime spot for hauntings and other paranormal activity. It is widely held by paranormal experts that when a violent death occurs, the earth can absorb the highly charged negative energy created when the soul leaves the body. This belief is related to the ancient stone tape theory that suggested that rocks and stones can capture the energy from a violent death. When those materials were used in the construction of castles, dungeons, and even roads, this residual energy still lingers, giving off readings or indications that can be picked up or recorded on special equipment such as EMF and EVP recorders. If these theories are valid, the old Graveyard Hill, now Cemetery Hill, should be filled with the spiritual energy created by the massive loss of lives in the battle that occurred there. The exact date when Graveyard Hill was established is unknown. It is safe to assume from its name, however, that a graveyard dating from some century past existed and was part of the killing fields of the Battle of Helena. I recently had occasion to be in Helena on a business trip and followed the signage around the city directing me to the old Confederate cemetery. Given my interest in both cemeteries and history, I could hardly pass up the opportunity to tour it. The newer cemetery one enters to reach the old Confederate burial ground is beautiful and well-maintained, with an ornate front arched gateway. But the steep, craggy ridges and hills on which it sits are somewhat odd and off-putting. Driving paths throughout the cemetery, which grow extremely narrow in some places, zigzag across and around hilly ridges. One can easily get lost in the confusing maze of pathways, which lends an eerie and unsettling feeling to the grounds. The old Confederate cemetery sits on the very top of a tall hill, and for any lover of Civil War history, it is a rare jewel to tour. The first thing one sees when arriving at the top of the hill is the towering statue of Patrick Ronan Cleburne. Born in Cork County, Ireland, he served in the 41st Regiment of Foot of the British Army before he and his siblings immigrated to the U.S. in 1849. Cleburne sought work in Helena as a druggist, and during the required 5-year wait for naturalization, he studied law, passing the bar after he became a U.S. citizen. Patrick Cleburne completely embraced his new country. When the Civil War erupted, he joined the Confederacy. Because of his military experience in the British Army, he quickly earned the rank of captain and then brigadier general. He received a citation from Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederacy, for his victory over Union General Joseph Hooker at Ringgold Gap, Georgia. Cleburne did not die in the Battle of Helena, but was killed a year later, leading the charge against Union troops in Franklin, Tennessee. He was 36 years old. Initially, he was buried near the place he died, at St. John's Cemetery in Columbia, Tennessee. His remains, however, were exhumed and relocated to the old Confederate cemetery 6 years later. Upon arriving at the Confederate cemetery, I popped out of my car to explore. Right away, I was struck by the heaviness of the cemetery coupled with a feeling of overwhelming sadness, and soon a feeling that I was not alone. In fact, I was quite alone, yet the uneasy feeling I was being watched would not leave me. In my travels, I have been to certain places where the atmosphere is best described as heavy and sad. One such place is Normandy, France. The other is Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, Scotland. I can only describe the aura as thick and almost smothering. Was the stone tape theory at work in this cemetery in the Mississippi Delta? I was met by that same sense of sadness and heaviness. Walking amid the Confederate soldiers' graves, I was struck by the utter silence of the place and the persistent feeling of being watched. 2 grave markers caught my attention. One was a simple headstone upon which was engraved, "Known but to God, killed in the Battle of Helena, July 4th, 1863, 6 Confederate soldiers." Their bodies had been discovered in 2002, 139 years later, at the ground once held by Battery C. These poor souls had not only died in a horrific battle, but their bodies were not discovered, let alone given proper burial, for more than a century. Found, but never identified. The other marker was a tombstone that read, 6 Unknown Soldiers, CSA. Another 6 souls whose names and lives were lost forever to history. These men sacrificed their lives fighting for a cause they believed in, but their identities would never be known, and families and friends had been left behind never knowing their fates. Visitors and novice ghost hunters who explore the old Confederate cemetery report that they hear the disembodied cries and moans of men, seemingly in great pain. Other visitors' written accounts claim to have seen fleeing shadow figures. Legend persists that the ghostly apparitions of Confederate soldiers can be seen on Graveyard Hill, suddenly disappearing. After pausing for a while among the graves, I returned to study the statue of Patrick Cleburne, son of Ireland, adopted American, Helena resident, engaged to be married, chemist, lawyer, military leader. He had lived a large life in his 36 years and died leading a charge on a battlefield far from his homeland. The memorial statue towering over the cemetery seemed a fitting tribute to the fallen hero. As I turned to walk back to my car, I happened to notice a small gravestone a few feet away from the towering Cleburne Memorial. Much to my surprise, it was the actual grave of Patrick Cleburne, small and modest. It was later that I would learn that he had first been buried in Columbia, Tennessee, close to the site of the Battle of Franklin where he had died. But in 1870, his body was exhumed and reinterred in the grave now before me, marked by the tombstone from his original grave. Did he appreciate the disturbance of his place of rest in Tennessee? Or was his spirit happy to be returned to his adopted home of Helena? Yet another sudden, chilly, forceful breeze, or was it a cold spot, on an otherwise windless day alarmed me. A pervasive feeling overcame me that I was no longer welcome here, if I had ever been. I darted for the safety of my car and departed the graveyard, watching the commanding face of General Cleburne's statue in my rearview mirror. If you happen to visit the newer cemetery below the old Confederate cemetery, seek out the hidden grave of a doctor and his dog, tucked away on a drive path up the hill. According to the Helena World, a legend says that the dog witnessed the murder of his master and after the interment of his body, refused to leave his owner's side. The dog perished from longing for his master. The dog was buried beside his best friend, and a large statue marks the spot. The newspaper reported that a paranormal group, Black Cat Investigators, visited the cemetery and the doctor's grave in April 2006. They reported hearing whimpers, howls, and the panting of a dog on a night when all was otherwise quiet in the cemetery grounds. Little Rock Family lists the old Confederate cemetery among its family-friendly haunts and spooky locales on its Arkansas Magical Mystery Tour. And Cha-Cha, a Q&A resource, lists it at number 1 on its list of top 20 haunted places in Helena, West Helena.